Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
So hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm excited to introduce you to J. Robert Harris. JR has been exploring and backpacking long distance for more than 60 years in some of the most remote and inhospitable wilderness areas in the world. That kind of scares me a little bit, but we'll talk about that more in a moment because I consider inhospitable wilderness to be like a bad Hampton Inn. He's unsupported and mostly alone. He's written numerous articles about his experience, as well as a book entitled Way Out There, Adventures of a Wilderness Trekker. Joining me today to talk about his life and career and book is J.R. Harris. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, J.R.
Thank you, Mike. Great to be here.
It's great to have connected with you. J.R., I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody as we begin these conversations, which is, where does your story begin?
Well, you know, I could be kind of snarky and say my story begins where everybody's story begins, when I was born. But to be real about it, my story really begins, my exploration story really begins when I was about 13, 14 years old as a Boy Scout. You know, I grew up in New York City, where I still live. My parents were working class, lived in projects. And during the summer, things could get a little kind of, I'll say, sketchy, you know, for a young guy. There's a lot of gangs, and, you know, my parents were a little bit concerned about me getting into the wrong crowd, although I never was a troublemaker or anything. But their solution was to sign me up into the Boy Scouts and send me away for the whole summer into the Catskill Mountains to get away from the city. And I went kicking and screaming. I had never been in the mountains. I had no idea what, you know, what it was like out there. You know, I even today, I tell my friends, the first time I ever saw grass, you know, I tried to smoke it. You know, that's how, you know, out of it I was. So I went kicking and screaming. But when I got there, things changed in a hurry. You know, I started to learn how to, you know, outdoor skills, how to read a map, use a compass, track animals, which plants were edible, and how to build a fire in pouring down rain. And the confidence that it gave me was really what started me on this notion that, well, if I can survive in a wilderness environment, then anything out there that I want to see and learn about, including people who live there, I can use my skills to go out and actually explore and find knowledge, self-awareness, confidence, and all that while backpacking in the wilderness. So it really started when I was in the Scouts.
Wow. My frame of reference for the Catskills is two sources: Miss Maisel and Dirty Dancing. That's the extent of knowledge I have about the Catskills. Did you feel like a fish in the water, like fish out of water, rather, when you were first up there?
You know, I had never been anywhere near anything even that resembles mountains or forest or anything like that. You know, I saw for the first time, you know, a deer that wasn't in a cage, you know, or in a raccoon and a bear and snake. You know, it was all new to me. You know, I growing up in the city, you know, wildlife to me was pigeons and cockroaches and rats, you know, and you know, and other thing, you know, I could see so much sky, you know, it wasn't blocked off by high-rise buildings and towers and things of that nature. So it was totally different environment. It was like I got off the bus and I was on a different planet.
Yeah.
But It changed pretty quickly, actually. And
What was the transition back to New York like, and back to city life like after the end of that summer?
well, when I came back home, I was not the same guy anymore. I had been through those weeks up there. I learned a lot about myself, a lot about who I was. Not to mention all the skills, which I knew I wouldn't be using back home. But I had a certain maturity and a certain confidence that I didn't see in the friends that I left behind. My parents could see it right away, and they never had any experience being in the outdoors either. But they knew that I was somehow different, and different in a positive way. So much so that by the time the next summer came around, I was begging them to send me back up there again,
Yeah.
which they did.
Could you pinpoint or recall any of those lessons that you learned about yourself during that sort of very transformative summer?
Well, I'll try. I I learned how to handle adversity. When I was in scout camp, they had a rule that said if you got the following three merit badges: camping, cooking, and pioneering, you could requisition 4 days worth of food, and you can actually leave the campsite and go off by yourself into the mountains. Now you had to stay within the boundary of the camp, and you had to tell your leaders where you were going. But if you wanted, you could go out for up to 4 days, and that's what I did. I got those merit badges, and I said, "Give me my food. Hey, I'm getting out of here." I don't know why I wanted to do it, but I found a beautiful campsite overlooking this lake, and I would stay there by myself. Again, it was maybe a half mile from the campsite, but to me, it was being alone. It was solitude, and I learned to trust myself in an environment that I wasn't really that familiar with, that I didn't grow up in. I learned how to make decisions and have confidence in those decisions without having to talk it over with anybody or to kick it around. And I just felt more at ease, more mature. Another thing I learned was how important it was to safeguard the environment, to respect the habitat of the animals that lived out there. That had never really occurred to me. This notion of, the wilderness needs some kind of protection, stewardship, and so forth. And so I learned to appreciate the outdoors, to put it very simply. So those are
Yeah.
some of the lessons. Yeah.
Yeah. And how did this experience, how, if at all, did this experience influence what you wanted to do when you grew up in life?
Well, one thing I always wanted to be when I was really young, I always wanted to be an explorer. And so, as a kid, I would go down to the library and I read books about the Lewis and Clark expedition and the mountain men, especially the mountain men. I saw myself as this guy, dressed in buckskin and, leading a pack train into the mountains, to do, trapping and hiking and all that kind of stuff. But growing up in the city like I did, everybody said, "Oh, you can't do that. Get real, man. You gotta have money to do that. You gotta be white to do that. You gotta be this to do. You gotta be that." Now my parents always said, "Look, whatever you want to be, you can be it if you try hard enough. Nobody's gonna give it to you. It's not gonna be easy, but yeah, if you want to be an explorer or anything else, and you want it badly enough, you can be it." So now I'm coming back from scout camp and I have these kind of skills, and I really started to believe at that stage that, yeah, I could go out there and I could be maybe not a mountain man per se, but I could certainly go out and be an explorer. I can go out and, if I wanted to walk on a glacier, or if I wanted to watch a caribou migration in the Yukon, or go into some indigenous community and see how they live, that I could actually do that. And so that was the incentive, and that was what I learned, and that's how I was able to realize my dream of being an explorer.
Yeah. So what did you, when when you did grow up, what tell me about some of your early, kind of career experiences, because I'm curious to see if there's an overlap between, this interest you had, in childhood and what you wound up doing, for a living.
Well, I had I was able to go to college, first in my family. I got my degree in psychology, and I became interested in people, how they live, what they think, and, and all that. So two things. Number one, professionally, I started a career in market research. I had corporate positions at Media Research, NBC. I worked for General Foods Corporation in White Plains for 3 years. I worked another 3 years for PepsiCo in the international division. I was research director. Then in 1975, I went out and started my own business, JRH Marketing Services. So, but I also, with that psychology background and my interest in people, I was curious to go into really remote places where there were people living subsistence lifestyle, people living off the grid. And so what I would do is I began to, I would pick out a certain group, indigenous people, let's say the Inuit people in Alaska. Before I left home, I would study as much as I could find about their history, tradition, what they eat for breakfast, everything. And then I'd figure out where they live and how to get there. And I would just go. I didn't know anybody. I had no letter of introduction and no nothing. I knew I'd get as far as I could go, and then I have to walk the final, whatever, a couple of days or whatever. And I would just show up. And the people there would be like, who are you? And they'd say, well, where's the rest of your party? And I say, no, I'm here alone. And I say, well, where are you coming from? And I'd say, New York City. And they go, New York City? What? And then it was like, well, why are you here? Why did you come out here? And so I told them what I just told you. I'm interested in who you are, but I wasn't satisfied to just read about it or whatever. I needed to come here and see it for myself, and I tell them, listen, I'm not going to be a burden. I've got everything I need. I got my own food. I got my tent. I got all my clothing, everything I need. And if you need any help, I'll stay here and I'll help you out. But essentially, I just want to be like a fly on the wall, see how you live, and ideally to sit down and talk to the elders and listen to your story and find out who you really are and where you come from and what your dreams are. And basically that's what I've been doing all these years.
And I mean, I imagine this is not something you're getting paid to do. The clients aren't hiring you to study, the elders of the Inuit people. It's really just driven primarily by your curiosity.
I tell people I'm just an ordinary guy with a curious mind and a valid credit card. And I'm willing to go anywhere to satisfy the curiosity. And that's basically what I do. In 1993, I got elected into the Explorers Club. And I'm still going out there. I have more than 50 years of trekking, more than 50 multi-week expeditions around the world, almost all of them alone. But it's an adventure, and it certainly is an experience that's helped define who I am and how I approach life and my respect for the environment and everything else.
Yeah, and I imagine it made you a damn good researcher too.
I certainly learned how to listen, and how to respect other people's opinions, unconditional positive regard, all the things that we hold sacred in our profession about listening to people and getting information. And I was able to utilize that to satisfy my own curiosity.
Well, I was going to say, like, curiosity. I think we've known each other for 25 minutes, but I have to say, if I were to analyze you, curiosity is your superpower. I mean, that's sort of what fuels everything. And as a researcher, I tell young researchers who say, "Hey, Mike, I want to do what you do," or clients who say, "Hey, I want to get into the qualitative space. What should I study?" I'm like, well, you can read a lot of articles about it, but you really need to just assess whether or not you've got that curiosity gene. I mean, I think we all have curiosity, but it's on a spectrum like so many other things. And if you are just a really curious person, it's gonna fuel your ability to be a great researcher.
Totally agree. I totally agree. Curiosity is the engine that drives exploration, and it's the engine that drives self-knowledge and self-learning.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all about curiosity with me. I'm
And
curious about everything.
and there's an overlap there too, because my other hat is as an author, and I interview primarily authors on the show. Curiosity is something that authors and researchers have to have in common, because if you're writing a story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, you've got to be a really curious individual to actually kind of tell an interesting story and explore areas that maybe other people haven't explored before, to find some new territory to write about. Um, so, and I
And
know, you're an author yourself, because I do want to talk a little bit about your book, "Way Out There: Adventures of a Wilderness Trekker." Just what can you share with me about the book?
well, now, I started doing these trips, maybe 60 years ago, and from day one, what I did on these trips is I always kept a journal, and a fairly detailed journal. Um, I felt that, someday I'm going to keep this journal, because someday I'm going to want to read about this again. Someday when I'm old in a rocking chair, like when I'm 50 years old, I'm going to be able to take this thing out and read it and relive all these adventures. And so I started keeping a journal, and I never kept a diary or anything prior to that. But something told me that this is a smart thing to do. Even though back in the early days, I'll go on a trip and I'd say, well, you're never going to forget all the stuff that's happening to you, so you don't really have to write anything. But no, I decided, write it down anyway. And then when I would get back home, I would look at it again, and then I would go back and I would edit it, and I would put in not all the stuff that just happened while I was out on the trip, but how I was reacting to it, what impact it had on me, what emotions I was feeling there. And so for each trip, I had all this data. Plus, I had thousands of photos. I had all my maps. I kept all my correspondence, emails to set these trips up. So when I finally decided to write a book, I had everything I needed. There were details that certainly I completely forgotten about, and luckily I had written about them. It's the smartest thing I ever did was to keep those journals. And so essentially, I just picked a handful of trips that I took that represented kind of a spectrum in terms of geography, why I do it, excuse me, and different emotions that I felt. Excuse me again. And I picked that kind of cross section of trips, and I wrote about each one of them. And I was careful to make it real, to not sound macho. I made mistakes, and I talk about that. There's also a lot of humor in the book, because I don't think of what I do as being kind of a survival trip, where everything is so harsh. I mean, it is harsh. It's tough to live out there, and especially weeks at a time, and you're by yourself. But there are funny incidents out there as well. I've had wildlife encounters, and just the interaction with the people that I met. Not that I meet a lot, but I put it together in a book, and I was going to just self-publish it, and print up, a half dozen copies for my friends who knew how to read. And I just for the hell of it, I went online and I Googled literary agents. Everybody said, "Oh, you're never going to get an agent. It's your first book. Nobody knows who you are." And I sent it out at random, and one of them responded and said, "Hey, your little 2-page summary sounds pretty interesting. I think maybe I can do something with this." I said, "Well, give it a shot." And I tell you what, man, like less than a week later, she called me back and she said, "I got an interest from a publisher. Mountaineers Books is the biggest outdoor publishing company, and the oldest and the most prestigious one. And they're going to contact you." And so editor-in-chief calls me up and says, "Hey, we saw a little 2-pager. Have you got, a chapter or two that we can read?" And I said, "Well, shit, I'll sell it." Excuse me. I said,
That's
"I'll
okay.
sell it." I got the whole manuscript. I clipped it to an email, and I sent it out. And 2 days later, they called me back and said, "Yeah, we just got to our editorial team. We just read the first chapter, and we want to do your book."
Wow.
And that was in 2017. And about a month ago, the book made bestseller.
Oh, that's so. I'm so. Congratulations on that. That's fucking amazing. I mean, and I don't mean to swear, but I'm just so excited for you, because it doesn't happen that way for first time authors. Usually, it does not happen that way.
Everybody told me it doesn't happen that way,
Yes.
and I just it's so fine, I'll just do what I do. But now the book, Amazon, it has 5-star rating on Amazon.
Yeah.
And boom, so I get it. I get feedback, and people are, they're curious about, to be honest, they're curious about an old Black dude who goes by himself, to, the Australian outback, to Greenland, Lapland, all the different lands, Iceland, whatever land, fantasy land. And just because he's a curious guy and wants to know what the heck is out there and what is life really like, for other people as well as for myself, being in a totally different environment.
Yeah.
And I think I tell the stories with, straightforward. I try to, with a little bit of humility, a little bit of humor, and certainly I got stories to tell. I mean, I've been doing this so long, and so many different places, that the stories themselves, people find them entertaining. So
yeah,
it's all good. Yeah.
I hope there's a lot of keynote speaking opportunities for you, because
yeah.
or a TED talk or something. I'd love to hear some of these.
Yeah, I've done a TED talk already, and I was on a book tour when COVID hit, and so that travel had to stop. But even now during COVID, I've been doing them via Zoom, when my Zoom works. I've been doing it via Zoom, and I don't even have to travel. I can do them from right here. And I also visit schools, or I did before COVID, to talk to young kids who grew up like I grew up, working class families, disadvantaged neighborhoods, whatever. And basically just to say, look, if there's something you want to do, if you have a passion, don't let people discourage you. If you want it badly enough, I tell them, just like my folks told me, if you want it, you can do it. And I'm proof that it can be done, and so the name of my little PowerPoint, it's called, "If I Can Do It, You Can Do It," and I said, you don't have to be an explorer. It doesn't really matter. Find your own passion, don't let anybody tell you can't make it happen, and don't convince yourself that it's beyond reach, because nothing's beyond reach. And so I feel that if I can, kind of pay it forward, and influence, some other people who might think, oh, I really want to do something, but I don't think I can make it happen. I want to dissuade them of that, and give them confidence that their life can be as fulfilling as mine. I tell them, when you get to be as old as I am, like 99 years old, you can see I'm still smiling here, because I've been living a dream all these years. So whatever it takes to make it happen, I can tell you that it's going to be worth it, and you're going to be happy that you did it.
You're not telling me you're 99 years old, are you?
Well, I'm being modest. I'm really 127.
It must be, I used to work for Unilever, and, we used to sell Pond's cold cream. You must use a hell of a lot of Pond's cold cream.
Yeah, it shows, right? But look at this. Now, actually, I'm 79.
Okay.
But I'm still out there. I'm still doing the same thing I always did. The motivation, I love it so much that I'm motivated to stay fit, for example, to watch what I eat, and get enough sleep, and all the stuff that they tell you to do, simply because I want to keep doing it.
Yeah.
And every time I think about that, and then I flash back to, like, the late 1950s, when I was like, don't send me out there. I don't want to go up there. I don't want to go out into the wilderness. So it's been a hell of a ride, and I'm still riding.
I mean, I love that part of your story where you're going out to the youth, and encouraging them to do what you were kind of hesitant to do, way back in the 50s. Because you give people an opportunity to experience something they may thought of they could never do, or could never be available to them. And you're changing lives the way your life was changed. And I love that part of your story.
Well, when I go into the school, all the teachers tell me, they say, JR, we say this to the kids every day, you can do it. But until they see somebody, who looks like them, who came up in the same kind of background, and was able to do it, was able to get a college education, was able to start his own business, able to get into the wilderness and enjoy, the adventure and the excitement of being outdoors. When they finally see that somebody actually did it and was able to do it, these teachers tell me that's what really makes a difference.
Yeah.
And so, this is kind of why I do it. I want other people to have those opportunities that I had to make to fulfill, their expectations in life.
Yeah. So the question I always like to end with, and we are kind of hitting up against the clock here, JR, but if you could, whisper some words of advice into that younger self, that self who was a little bit hesitant to head to Boy Scout camp in the Catskills, what sort of words of advice would you give the younger JR?
I'd say just keep doing what you're doing. Just keep doing what you did. I kept an open mind. I said you got to keep an open mind. You have to be willing to learn. Don't think you know it all. And above everything else, stay curious. Curiosity is going to lead you down paths that you never even dreamed existed. And you're going to end up, you're going to love it. It's not going to be easy, but if you love adventure, you love being curious. That's what I say to my younger self. And that's what I say to all kids who are young. Have a passion, find your passion, and make it happen.
Make it happen.
Done, but make it happen. If you got it, if that's what you want to do, get out there, find a way to make it happen, because it's possible.
No, see, now I have a dilemma. My dilemma was, and I'll tell you right now, because I have to write it down. Do I name this episode Stay Curious with J.R. Harris or Make It Happen with J.R. Harris? Because I was sold on Stay Curious, but then you said Make It Happen. And I'm like, man, that might have to be the title, Make It Happen. I don't know. I'm going to have to think about this one. Do you have a preference, J.R.?
I would say Stay Curious and Make It Happen, or something to that effect. I mean,
Okay.
Either one is good. It's your call, obviously.
That's right. This is the one area in my life where I have almost complete control.
There you go.
Well, of course, the book is Way Out There, Adventures of a Wilderness Trekker. The author is J. Robert Harris, or J.R. Harris, as he is known. J.R., this has been a fun conversation. I'm glad we were able to connect and talk. Before I let you go, any social media or websites that you want to plug?
Yes, I have a website. It's called jrinthewilderness.com.
All right.
And it's got some real nice photos. It's got a whole list of all the treks I've ever done. And it's got some information about or each of the places and things like that. It's a nice visual site, looks back at history. You could see pictures of me when I was a young guy of 92.
Very
so it's
good.
jrinthewilderness.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, J. Robert Harris, or JR in the Wilderness, and on Insta.
All right. Well, I will be sure to put all those in the show notes so all of you listening can easily reference. JR, thanks again for stopping by. I really appreciate it.
It was great talking to you. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.